I'm Dr. Jen Mangrum. I'm the Democratic nominee for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. I'm a native North Carolinian from Eastern North Carolina, the daughter of two educators, one a former Marine who after 30-something years became a fourth grade teacher. My mom was a kindergarten teacher, and I've had extensive experience in public schools myself. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation.
Great. Let's dive right in on teacher pay. I'm curious what you think is the best goal, the best metric to kind of shoot for. Is it national average in teacher pay? Is it Southern average in teacher pay? Talk about, what you think would be the best goal to pursue and why.
Well, and teacher pay is so important for recruitment purposes. And so I kind of have two metrics. One, I love Governor Cooper's drive to meet the national average. And I think that that is something that most people can wrap their brains around, because I know North Carolina knows their teachers are not being paid enough. But the second thing is, how many teachers are we recruiting, right? I'm a professor at UNCG. I teach the introduction class to elementary and middle grades. And in 2008, I had more than 200 students in my class. Last semester, I had just over 50. So I know that we're going to have a shortage. And so the other metric is when students step on a college campus, we need to know that they're going to make at least enough money compared to the people that go into the other industries. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you step on a campus and you're getting a degree in chemistry, and if you go into chemistry versus chemistry teaching, I think you get a cut of about 25%. So we need to be looking at those numbers so that students step on campuses and know, I'm not going to lose everything and have all this loan debt. Teaching is a viable option.
So you're one of the founding members of NC Families for Teacher Reform. Is it standardized testing reform? Is that right?
Oh, the North Carolina Families. Yes. I haven't worked with them in a while, but yes.
So talk about what standardized testing should look like in North Carolina. How should it change from where we are now?
So I guess one thing you need to know is I started teaching in 1987 and taught until 2001. And so I saw this move to accountability between those years. And high stakes testing, as it became the thing to do, I noticed a change in instruction. There's a lot of issues with high stakes testing, but one is teachers are narrowing the curriculum because they want their students to do well on the test. And so what people call teaching to the test is really making sure that you just cover what they need to know a lot. You're going to see this on the test. You're going to see this on the test. And that is especially harmful, I think, to students in high poverty schools. And that's actually where I see it the worst. There's so much stress and pressure for their children to do well that teachers are just not giving kids enough challenge, enough engagement. And so high stakes testing has been something for me that I think is destroying the creativity, the curiosity, the excitement of schools. I am a director of study abroad in Finland. I've been twice. This year got cut short because of COVID. They don't test kids until late middle school. And what they say to me is, Jen, that's not developmentally appropriate to have 8-year-olds sitting through these tests, which I believe too. So I just think there's numerous things, and we have to mention that they are used in punitive ways, right? So if you're a third grader and you can score 1 to 5, and 3 is proficient. If you score a 3 or below, you take home a letter. You're 8 years old, you take this letter home, and the words on it are, your child is not on trajectory to be college or career ready. I'm a mom, but I'm also a researcher, and I have a degree in elementary ed. That doesn't motivate a child to want to learn to read. We need to rethink how we're stigmatizing children if they don't do well on these high stakes testing. So between changing instruction, the stress and anxiety on kids, and then the punitive ways we use it, we have to reform high stake testing. And know that when I started in 1987, we didn't have it. We had the California Achievement Test, right? And it wasn't, I wasn't held accountable for it. It was information that we shared, but it wasn't put on a poster or put in your newspaper kind of thing.
So is there still value in it, or are you an advocate for eliminating it altogether?
I do think you need data. I agree. So what I would say is I'd like to take the high stakes part off it. I'd like us to use something like the NAEP, something that would allow us to see how we're doing across states. But in the classroom, I'd really like us to focus on formative assessment. That's the assessment that's going to tell you diagnostic information. How do I help this child? It also tells you what you're doing wrong. Like clearly, 20 out of 25 didn't get it. I need to do something different. And then it also sometimes tells you a lot about your children, because testing doesn't have to be multiple choice, believe it or not, and so you learn a lot about your kids when you give different kinds of assessment. So I am not against assessment, nor assessment that lets us know how we're doing nationally, but the high stakes piece is really not something I'm in favor of.
So you were on a task force, a North Carolina task force on reopening schools, and you published, I think, a task force document on your website, a very thorough task force document on your website. I'm curious, there are districts, urban and rural now around the country, that are reopening more fully than North Carolina is, and without any sort of kind of uncontainable outbreaks of infections. Has that informed your thinking at all? Do you think that that we're in a different place now than we were 2 or 3 months ago?
Yeah, when you called it chair of a task force, it kind of cracked me up, sorry. But I got 12 educators and parents together. And at that point, our current superintendent had a task force, but they hadn't produced anything. And I said, let's sit down and write something. And let's write something where we're not, I shouldn't say not concerned with money, but I didn't want that to be a barrier, right? Let's think. And I love going back to it, because I realized we did a pretty good job in thinking about what we need to do in the different scenarios. So, but my thoughts have remained the same. And that is, we must reopen schools. Everybody wants schools open, but we need to have 2 conditions. One, we're mitigating the virus, right? So whatever community you're in, you're wearing a face mask, you're social distancing, you're washing your hands. I was stunned to see my opponent standing beside, the candidate for lieutenant governor, who said masks don't work. That's irresponsible, if you ask me. We have to convince our communities to really try to mitigate this virus. And I'm not sure what the metrics are, because I've heard various numbers. Originally, I heard test under 5% positive rates, but I've heard other numbers. So I would really want to talk to Dr. Cohen and people about what that number is. So mitigating the virus is one. The second is making our schools safe. And educators are afraid. They're very concerned, and I think they have reason to be. The state board asked for, I think, $500 million to make sure we put in place things to make our schools safe, and they barely got half of it. If we don't fund resources to make it safe, then to me, we're not saying it's important, right? You put money behind what's important. And if we want to open them, we need to fund them so that everyone feels comfortable in the classroom.
Ned, do you have any questions?
I love it. You're on mute, Ned.
Got you here.
How many times does that happen, right?
Out on the campaign trail, you frequently mention that
You're on mute again.
unmuted me here. You hear me now?
Yes.
You do emphasize that you ran against Phil Berger, and you ran a spirited campaign. But in the event that you're elected, and he is too, you're going to have this sort of standoff between the Senate leader and the leader of education in the state. And how do you work with that in terms of, can you have detente there, or is it just going to be a headbutting session for 2 years, or how are you going to do that?
I am amazed I have been asked this question almost every time I've had a forum. And I don't know if it's because of his reputation or mine, but I can certainly work with the General Assembly. I think what Senator Berger found out in that campaign is I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I'm not afraid to stand up for education. I don't think there's anything he can do to me that would keep me from being honest, right? I also think that he took an oath, along with the rest of the General Assembly, to hold up the Constitution of North Carolina. And when he took up that oath, the courts for over 20 years have said, we are not meeting our constitutional obligation for our children. And so if he wants to stand up and follow the oath and the Constitution and do what the court said, we are going to work very easily together. And that means we are going to put that Leandro ruling and the Wested report into action. If he chooses not to, I'm not sure what people think an argument looks like, but to me, it's like this. It's a hard conversation where we keep coming back to, but tell me why. And how can we do this? Well, let's find a negotiation, because I'm not going to give up. I'm like a dog with a bone, right? I want kids in North Carolina to have the funds they need for a sound basic education. I'm not even asking for world class, but I'd like that.
What do you think about the structure of the office? There's been some lawsuits now between who's in charge, the board or the superintendent, and lately the legislature. So how do you finally get the center of power there? Where should it be grounded? How's that kind of work?
Yeah, and I understand.
Is it workable?
Yeah, and I understand there's changes right now, like going on right now. And I'm sure if I win, there'll be changes between November and January, because that's what politics is. What I believe, Ned, at my core, is that North Carolina has not asked themselves, what do we value? Once we know what we value, then we can start organizing so that we create a system that will do that. It's the same with the classroom. So what I've been doing, I have a couple of friends who are educators, and I call them my thought partners. And we've spent almost every week talking about what's important to the people we know in education. Then what we did is crafted for us a vision and a mission. And my favorite part is we talk about every child flourishing. And some people don't think words are important, but I do. And I love the idea of every child flourishing, because to me, we have to go beyond academics. We need to start thinking about the well-being of our children. After we did that, we started thinking, so what are our core values? And they're all around equity, right? The only way every child's going to flourish is if every child has the same opportunity. So with that being done, I'm now at a point where in my brain, kind of frazzled from time to time, but I'm thinking, if this is what I want to accomplish, what should the organization look like? It doesn't mean I'm putting anything in stone, because I also want to work with the state board. You said, where should that power be? I think every political element needs a checks and balance. So I am willing, and I've spoken to the chair of the state board, I'm willing to talk again about what that partnership looks like, and that whatever organizational design I've been thinking of, I want to share it with them and get feedback and talk about it. This idea that you can be audited and find things like $18 million worth of error says to me that the internal auditor should not report to the state superintendent, right? So I just think that we need to reorganize so that we are creating a department that meets the things we value and our goals, that shares power among the groups, and that ultimately is going to do what's best for Leandro so that we have equity among our schools. Does that answer it for you, Ned?
Well, it's as best as you can answer it, because it's sort of structurally
abstract right now, right?
Yeah.
But I have been thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Leandro and Wested. There's some big dollar figures associated with that. And your opponent mentioned, which is a familiar conservative comment, that we've spent a lot of money on schools and schools haven't gotten any better. So money's really not the answers. How do you respond to that observation?
I'm so glad you asked, because I brought a quote with me. I told you I started teaching in 1987, and in the 80s and 90s, we lifted achievement and we narrowed the gaps. And so I don't want to hear that we haven't made gains in the past 3 decades, because we have. And because my opponent says that a lot. And so I wanted to where is it? I wanted information, and I found this quote from Linda Darling Hammond, who I believe she also worked on the West Ed report. You know, she's an educator and researcher. But she said, North Carolina's sustained investments over 2 eras of reform in the 1980s and 1990s enabled it to become the first high poverty Southern state to achieve above national norms and to make more progress in closing the achievement gap during the 1990s than any other state. I know we can do it again. I believe that that the Republican leadership wants to go to a free market system. The only way you can go to a free market system is to convince everybody that schools are failing. And if you do that, they jump ship and schools fail. I want to see a new North Carolina that invests in public education, like when we had teaching fellows at its best, when we were paying teachers for their masters, when we were allowing due process and healthcare during retirement. I want to see us expand early childhood. I want to see TAs in the classroom. I had one my entire time, and she helped with reading. My understanding is Governor Hunt told me he put TAs in the classroom as part of his reading initiative. So I know we can do better, but it's going to cost money. And whatever we're spending now, when she mentions from time to time, you know, we've increased and we're this on the Southeast or whatever. I say we've increased the amount of spending because we've increased enrollment and we've increased cost. And we're always going to increase what we spend from year to year. We also had major cuts in 2008, right? So we're trying to make up for that. But we are not investing enough. And you can ask any educator, any principal, any superintendent, that they do not have what they need to accomplish. We don't have a nurse in every school. We have one school psychologist for every 2,100 students. Not every school has a social worker. There are so many things we need, and they cost money. I wish they didn't, but they do. And so we have got to invest in schools so that we can see the outcomes down the road. And so that somebody writes about us, you know, in 20 years about how well we did.
Mentioning Senator Berger, you know, one of his pet projects is the Read to Achieve program, which has had, I guess, mixed results is one way to describe it. What do you think about that approach to reading? And would you take a whole new approach if you could to get kids to read earlier?
So yes, one of the things I would like to do is I know that the first 1,000 days of a child's life are the most crucial to their brain development and ability to learn. We need, if a child is in a zip code that right now predicts the outcome of achievement, so we're talking about high poverty neighborhoods, we should be working with the very youngest so that they have health care, so expand Medicaid, they have good nutrition. But I love the program in Durham, and Winston-Salem Forsyth just borrowed it, or not borrowed it, took it, and they're modeling it. And it's called Book Babies. And it's families that make, I believe, $15,000 or less. It's at the poverty level. And they send in a literacy person when the child's 6 months old, gives 10 books, and then has the literacy person work with the parents to talk about phonemic awareness, sounds, how you engage the child with the book. They do it every 6 months. The first group just went to kindergarten. Ginger Young, who is the founder of this, has a longitudinal study that shows they're so far more prepared for kindergarten than the children who didn't have that. And they have 100 books in the home. So it doesn't have to be that, right? We also need to expand pre-K, but I think we need to be thinking about learning doesn't start at 3. So that's one thing for reading. The younger we catch them, the more likely they are going to do well. And this is supporting families too, right? Supporting their literacy. This iStation thing that happened, what bothers me the most is there's, What Works in Reading is a clearinghouse put out by the US Department of Education. And it tells us what tools and programs are researched to show the best results. And we're not using that. So I think politics, and I'm you know, I know I've run for office, but I don't consider myself a politician. I consider myself a public servant. And I don't understand why we're not using these common sense tools to make choices. And my guess is the politics come in and it's, you know, who's donated money or who's got the shiny object. But reading, we know how to teach reading. We've got the research and we've got the national panel, right? The report on reading from 2000. We know how to teach reading. We just have been sidetracked by shiny objects, lack of teacher assistance. Teachers have classes that are overwhelming. Kids are coming in so far behind that it's hard for the teachers to catch them up. They're growing them. So I think we need to start when they're babies, if we can, and find some kind of structures or supports for that. But then also let's rethink reading to what we know works. And right now, a computer is not assessing properly what kids can do.
All right. Thank you very much, Jen.
Jen, thanks so much for being with us here today. Is there anything that we've we're about to give you an opportunity to say, what else have we not asked you about that you'd like to talk about?
Gosh, you know, this was nice. I like this one. I want to say that I am the most qualified candidate. And why I think that is because I have the most experience in the classroom. I have 12 years as a classroom teacher in North Carolina public schools. I have 2 years as a literacy coach in the same school, and then a year at the district office, right? So I was 15 years of public school experience. Teachers trust me because they know that I have it. I also have extensive expertise and knowledge. I have a BA in elementary ed, I have a master's in early childhood, and I have a PhD, the terminal degree in our field, in curriculum and instruction. So that means I have studied education and I've read education as well as being a practitioner. The final thing is I have extensive opportunity to work with new teachers and practicing teachers through my work in higher ed. And in the colleges of education, I've had great opportunity at leadership. If you can't tell, I grab it when I can get it. I designed, created, and implemented the elementary ed program at NC State, the largest program in their College of Ed. Got it through the Board of Governors in 18 months. Okay, you guys know how hard that is, right? And then stayed on as the first faculty member. I returned to UNCG because I'm also what I think a pretty good mom, and I wanted to be closer to home. I've been there for 12 years. I co-chair the elementary ed committee. I'm the program coordinator for our Masters of Art in Teaching. I co-founded the STEM TLC, a colleague and I, which provides professional development for teachers in high poverty schools that want to teach engineering. And it's been overwhelmingly fantastic. I'm the program director for Taking Students Study Abroad in Finland. I teach undergraduates, so I'm creating the next generation of teachers. I teach graduate school, so I'm working with practicing teachers every day. I'm in schools twice a week supervising student teachers and interns. And then finally, I'm on the board of the National Paideia Center. I've worked with them 25 years, and I've done professional development across the country, probably 25 states, in literacy, in reading, thinking, speaking, and listening. I am so qualified for this position that I feel like my life brought me to this point. The last thing I'll say, and I say this when I'm on the campaign trail, is when I was 14, my mother who's a kindergarten teacher, had a massive heart attack just before school. And my dad yelled for me. Sometimes I can get through it better than others. I came running into the kitchen and held her as she passed away. Dad called the paramedics. He left with the paramedics and my mom's body. I'm alone. My older brother and sister, my sister was in college and my brother had gone off. He's 12 years older than me. Not knowing what to do, where to go. And I never thought about this until I started running for office. I guess I never really dealt with it. But I walked to school that morning. I walked to school 30 minutes after my mom left and had been passed away. And when I did that, I wanted to be with Mrs. Travis and Mrs. Warren and the teachers that I knew would take care of me. And I think that's important because that is why my heart is in public education. There are lots of Jens who walk into school having something traumatic happening or some kind of experience, and school's the safe place. So I tell people that because this isn't a job for me. It's going to be a job. I know it's going to be an overwhelming job, but that's not why I'm in it. I chose to be a teacher, an elementary teacher, because of my mom and my dad, and because of Mrs. Warren and Mrs. Travis. And I want to be a champion for teachers, and I think I am. And when you champion teachers and administrators, you also are a champion for our students. They cannot be successful if they don't have the best teachers. I also am a champion for teachers because there's so much more than academics, and we need to lift them up and celebrate them. And so I wanted you to know that. That's why I'm in this. I really appreciate you allowing me to share. I know I talk a lot, but I'm so passionate about education, and I really appreciate you allowing me this time.